Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS. And today I'm going to give you my review for the first episode of Series 7 of Black Mirror called Common People. And this episode is about a couple by the name of Mike and Amanda Waters. And they are very much in love. We meet them in sort of like their early 30s and they are just really much in love. They're enjoying life, they have their own little routine. They have their own separate jobs. Amanda's a school teacher. Mike's a construction worker. And when they have their anniversary, they like to go to the Juniper in sort of like the long distance. And they like to have their cheeseburgers and they like to make fun of a lot of the patrons. And they just have their own simple, lifestyle to lead. And they really much enjoy themselves. They pretty much are living, I suppose you could call it off the grid. They have their very own simple living arrangement. Yes, they have smartphones and everything like that, but they pretty much are living a basic as life as possible, as much as they can afford as possible, with the money that they can get with both her teaching and his construction job. So when Amanda suffers a really horrible accident at work where she just collapses, she's effectively in a coma, and while she's in the coma, Mike is approached by a woman who says that she can become well again and become functional again if we implant this chip in her brain that allows her to become, very active and very, it boosts a lot of her emotions and she's really very active and very, happy. But then she's also very much alive and very much stable. So they can only do this with the simple price of about £300 a month or $300 a month. And at first, Mike is very much into it, but he's only doing it because he thinks, oh, this will keep my wife alive. But then as the episode goes on, what the woman doesn't tell Mike is that this particular new thing that they've got, this new subscription service that they've got, is pretty much in its infancy stages. So when both Mike and Amanda are travelling into town to visit the Juniper for their anniversary, Amanda collapses because they're out of range of the grid of the satellites that they've got round there, and that's really quite disturbing. But then he has to go back and he has to try to bring her back to life again, as it were. And when they mention this, they say, okay, we can give you another service where it's called Rivermind Plus, where you get to have all the perks, but this time you can travel out of range. So they say, okay, we'll subscribe to that with an extra few pounds. I'll have to get a few extra hours at the school, and he says, oh, I have to put in some extra hours at the construction site, and it's all dandy for now. Until that is, Amanda starts to, when she's randomly having a conversation with her husband Mike, she begins to ask about things like, oh, have you ever heard about Viagra? Try our new Viagra tablets and things like that. So it really becomes quite awkward, because it turns out this particular new subscription service has glitches, but instead of actually trying to improve them and actually hear about customer feedback, the woman who they keep going back to keeps introducing them to new upgrades and premium subscriptions. So instead of Rivermind Plus, it's called Rivermind Lux and things like that. So they're basically saying that, oh yeah, you can do so much better, you can improve your mood to the max, and it can absolutely help you do things without having to learn them, like learning parkour and things like that. So it's very kind of bonkers and very absurd. But what's very interesting is, like I said, this person is recommending these new updated subscriptions with the intent of bleeding money out of them. And like I said, Mike and Amanda are what's known as pretty much, living as basic a life as they can. They're not very much technology reliant. Yes, they have their smartphones and their mobile phones and their touchscreen technology, like their smartphones and things like that. But in reality, they don't have much in regards to advanced technology. So they are living as basic a life as possible, as much as they can on their own salaries together. So when they're pitched with all these different ideas, it's a huge shock to both of them, especially Chris, who, when he actually finds out that it's an extra, £600, he actually just slams his head on the desk, thinking to himself, how can we keep up with this, because there's just so much money. So he decides at one point to go on this OnlyFans style site where it's called Dummy for Dummies, which is basically where it's basically a combination of Jackass meets Saw, where it's kind of like, okay, you have to have these characters do humiliating things for the price of, you know, a single penny, or like £50 or £90 or something like that, or $90. And it really is quite, you know, humiliating, and it feels like Saw because it does feel like they're being held against their will, but except they're not, they choose to be there. But then at the same time it feels like Jackass in the sense that it's for the amusement of others, but it's not for the amusement of the people who are actually partaking in it. It's that kind of feel. And these particular types of embarrassments go from Mike suggesting that he put a mousetrap on his tongue, to him basically, you know, shoving a dildo up his rectum, all sorts of horrible, degrading things. And it really is quite humiliating. And what I like about Chris O'Dowd is he really does portray a spectrum of emotion in this episode, because we mostly know him as the cop from Bridesmaids. Well, I know him as the cop from Bridesmaids, but there are other people who know him from the IT crowd. And he's mostly known as a very comedic actor, but here he really does show a spectrum of emotion on his face. That whenever he has a sad scene, or whenever he has to literally show emotion on his face without having to go too big, he really does show that he can have range as an actor, and he can do more than just be the funny guy. And I really like that. I like the fact that it really has given him a lot to chew on in regards to an actor. But what's really great about his performance is he just he completely, you know, starts rolling with the punches, and he doesn't really give up at all, because he's thinking about Amanda, he's thinking about the love of his life and who he's doing this for. And they're planning on having a baby as well, so they're doing a lot of, you know, times in the bedroom. And it really is quite, you know, funny in many instances, because there is an instance where just for a couple of hours they get to have Rivermind Plus, and they turn up the pleasure levels to about 100, so like it's max, so that, you know, Amanda starts acting very enthusiastic. When they go to the Juniper, she starts eating the cheeseburger and really loving it as if it's the best cheeseburger she's ever tasted. She hears the band that's playing that night playing the song Loving You, and she's like listening to it as if it's the most romantic and the most wonderful song she's ever heard. And it's really kind of funny, but then at the same time you're kind of thinking to yourself, this is basically her at the max level of pleasure, so she's actually taking everything in stride. But what's really funny is when it gets to the time where they actually have to rest and she's having sex, it's like she is treating it as if it's the best sex she's ever had. And even, you know, Mike's character is like going, oh, for God's sake, love, I'm not that good. And it's really kind of funny to sort of watch. But then I like the scenes, like, say, for example, afterwards she goes into commercial mode and she starts saying, why don't you try out a new Viagra range this time? And it's actually really funny that she would. And I love Rashida Jones's commercial speak, because she does sound like those people who, it's almost, you know, it's almost AI generated with how she says these words. It feels almost like she's done an AI generated version of one of those commercial announcers, and it's really funny to sort of watch and, you know, sort of hear, and it really is just a really funny instance. But I just really think this episode is really brilliant, because this episode is essentially a commentary on those of us who do like to live very basic, not necessarily have the highest of gadgets, but because we either have lower income jobs where he kind of only can afford so much in a month or a year at a time, we do often live very basic lives. It's almost like when you introduce an elderly couple to the latest technology, it's kind of like something that really does feel like, oh, it's going to be the best thing for you, but when you actually use it yourself, you don't quite know how it works, or maybe it's doing a lot worse for you and it feels very strange. And what I really like is that the title Common People is actually very interesting, because in reality, Mike and Amanda are effectively they're Martin Crane from Frasier, effectively, because Martin Crane in Frasier, who's one of my favourite characters in sitcoms, he basically is the most basic person you can imagine. He likes his home comforts. He used to be a cop on the beat, but now he's, you know, due to an injury that he sustained on the job, he's now become, you know, he's become disabled, and he now has to rely on, you know, his friends and his family and his two sons, Niles and Fraser. and he has to get home helping, which is where Daphne Moon comes in. And of course, he's into his home comforts. He likes baseball, he likes football and things like that. Like, he's a real man's man. But then he has these two sons who like opera and, you know, psychology and Shakespeare. And whenever he hears them talk about, you know, Sigmund Freud and the Oedipus complex, he like goes blah 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 and things like that. It's really kind of, he doesn't know it. It's all, you might as well be speaking a different language to mine. And there's this really wonderful episode, I think in the first season of Frasier, where they go to this, you know, very remote steakhouse where it's very kind of old fashioned sounding, almost like a very German style steakhouse or a very Canadian style steakhouse. And it's really funny because Frasier and Niles hate it, but Martin absolutely loves it because it's the best steak. And there's another episode where he basically has his old chair removed, his old tatty, you know, recliner armchair removed by Frasier, and it gets replaced with a state-of-the-art one, and he hates it because he loves that old chair. And it's kind of the same with Mike and Amanda, where they love their simple basic lifestyle, so that when they get involved in all these upgrades, it feels like it's a strain on their, not just their relationship, but it's a strain on their lives, literally. Excuse me, it's literally a strain on their lives in the case of Amanda, because if she doesn't use any of these Rivermind subscriptions, she'll end up, you know, very slowly fading mentally almost. And it's almost like, you know, there's almost like a drug addict quality to the whole thing, but then at the same time they have to use it because otherwise what's going to happen to Amanda? She's going to die. And it's a really sad story, because what's also happening is that Mike really loves his wife, because he wouldn't be doing the things that he's doing. He wouldn't be doing the things that, you know, he's doing with the Dummies for Dummies website, where he's essentially torturing himself, pulling out his teeth, putting a mousetrap on his tongue, and doing all these horrible, degrading things for her. If it wasn't for her, he wouldn't be doing them. He'd just be living on his own and minding his own business and taking each day at a time. But he really does love his wife. So when it actually does come time for them just to give up, and for them to slowly come to terms with the fact that, yes, Amanda's probably going to die, this is it for them, it is genuinely very sad. And you do really feel sorry for Mike, because he tries his hardest. He really does. And eventually what goes on with Dummies for Dummies actually catches up with him at work, and one of his colleagues actually messes with him. He says, oh, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword, brother. And he actually gets very angry. He beats the shit out of him, and he ends up causing an accident, which leaves one of his colleagues disabled. And I thought, well, if you derive pleasure from seeing characters humiliate themselves in degrading ways, what goes around comes around. I'd say that to his colleague. But yes, it's actually a really tragic situation. So when he does eventually give up and have to come to terms with the fact that his wife is going to die, it is a really horrible scenario, and it does feel really sad. And I think Chris O'Dowd and Rashida Jones do a very good job of kind of really kind of selling this idea that this couple is very much in love, and you really do feel bad for them when things do go wrong, because they are just very simple and very straightforward. They're not really kind of, you know, into the big high-tech stuff, all the very grandiose upper-class lifestyle. They're like Martin Crane in Frasier, where they just love their home comforts, and they love simplicity. They don't want complications. They don't want, you know, over-the-top, exaggerated gestures. They just want to be themselves and enjoy it. And I really like that about Martin as a character, and I like the fact that he always reacts in these very exaggeratedly goofy ways towards Frasier and Niles. And that's a very interesting contrast. But the fact that they always play a very class thing with the Rivermind clientele, who can afford like $700, $300 a month, and like $300 is like pocket money allowance to upper class people, whereas to Mike and Amanda, it's literally like a fortune. You have to fork out a fortune in order to keep up with these subscriptions to Rivermind, and it really is genuinely quite sad. But I really do think it's a fantastic it's a very fantastic episode, and I love how subtle it was as well. Like the fact that both the couples share a name called Waters, and there's a subscription service called Rivermind, which means they're flowing in sync. I also like the fact that in Amanda's class, where she's teaching natural sciences to kids, she talks about the process of plants giving off food. So she calls it, what's it called, beginning with a P. One of the students says polarization, which means a divide between two groups or two separate groups of people. and she says pollination, which is the idea of breeding or sort of giving food to other plants, their offspring, or helping them grow with food, pollen. And I thought that was very interesting because not only are they in separate parts, essentially divided and cut off from the rest of the world, or cut off from each other in terms of profession, but they're also kind of pollinating in the sense that they want to have a child. So I thought that was a very clever way of sort of giving exposition without it feeling too heavy-handed or too much like information overload. And that's what I really liked. That's when I knew I really liked the episode, when I actually found myself going, okay, pay attention to that detail because that could be important. It could be nothing, but it could be something. So I looked it up, and when I found out what it was, I thought that's actually very clever considering where the episode goes and things like that. So as soon as the episode ended, I thought, I'm going to really love this episode because of those little details that they put into the script. But yeah, I really enjoyed this episode, and let me know what you thought of this episode, common people. Whatever your thoughts are, comment below and be sure to let me know. And if you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more, please subscribe for more videos. This has been Josh with WHIMS Corner Industry Musings, or WHIMS. And I hope you're having a very good day. Stay tuned for my review of Petit Noir. And I hope you enjoy the episode. Take care, bye-bye for now.